Hello, I'm happy to welcome Kevin Patzelt with his speech, Controlling the Uncontrollable, Music in an Open World Survival Games.
I'm honored to be here today. Thank you all for coming and checking out this presentation. So my name is Kevin Patzelt. I'm the audio director at Undead Labs out in Seattle, Washington. I'm just going to dive right in. I've always believed that game audio is half creative and half technical. In that sense, it's kind of unique as far as all the audio disciplines are concerned. Today, I'm going to cover a topic that really joins these two ideas together. We're going to dive into the music system I created for an open-world zombie survival game called State of Decay. If you haven't heard of it or played the game, think of a GTA-style perspective, so third person over the shoulder, but set in the zombie apocalypse. In our game, there's a lot of procedural systems. It's incredibly dynamic and really generated on the fly. That includes our narrative and mission progression systems, and those two keep the game moving as you develop in your world. It's truly an open world where the player can choose to do anything at any time, and of course, all this needs music. Designing any music system is a daunting task. Open worlds are even more difficult. With the music system I'm talking about today, I had several key goals. I wanted players to be able to do what they like, whenever they like to do it, and make sure that the music system is flexible enough to adapt to what they're doing. Have to understand that anything can happen at any time. Limit repetitive music playback, that's important. Play sessions can vary from just a few hours to several hundred. Make sure that the music matches the action on screen. That's, of course, important for any music title. We came up with solutions for each of these, but before getting into the specifics, a bit about the game itself. So State of Decay 1 was created with a very small team of 24 developers using CryEngine. It was released as an Xbox Live Arcade title in 2013 and went to sell over 5.5 million copies across Xbox 360, Xbox One, and Steam. With such a small team, we had a lot of reviews point out that it wasn't very polished, but a lot of fun. And being at a lower price point, it delivered a lot of value. The original music budget was for only 25 minutes of music. However, we shipped with over 200. I'll get into how that was possible in a little bit. But to cover it real quick, the dramatic difference was because I was doing a lot of remixes of composer stems and then composing a lot of my own. And at the time, just for reference, we were using Fmod as our middleware. We're now working on State of Decay 2. It's currently in production, so we're still working on it right now. It's scheduled for release next year. The budget for this was a lot larger, 120 minutes, but we're already at 300 minutes and counting. We also have a larger team with about 65 developers working on the title. And this time we shifted over to Wise for the entire project because we're now using UE4 instead of CryEngine. Deciding upon the key concepts, how music is going to play, was vital for any project, especially ours, to get in early on. Working with the design team as early as possible will help in more ways than you can count, especially on any project. Tying together with design is key. You're going to know how pacing works, what you need to tie into, and what their plans are. To me, working with design is as important as seeing the art style itself. Knowing the design team's goals will help you understand intensity, difficulty levels, and gameplay loops, which are big in any title. I also don't believe that the music should always sit out in front of a mix, and I do believe that dynamic range across a title is really important. I believe our first game was successful because we let players live their own apocalypse. If zombies really took over town, would you take over a grocery store, a gun store, or would you stockpile toilet paper? Giving players freedom was always a key part of the game. Our game design always prompted teamwork. Because the apocalypse is always dangerous, working with others to rebuild society could yield to some of the more successful outcomes. But with freedom comes choice, and ultimately it's up to the player to decide how they want to play. So we bit off a lot when we started making the game. There were definitely some challenges along the way, especially with music. Zombies always respond to player actions. They'll hear you if you drive a car or shoot a gun, or even if you search through a house too quickly. Much of the game is procedural, so the music system had to reflect this. I couldn't rely on a structure or scripting at all to play back music. We also discovered that many people play the game for hundreds of hours. My hope was that the music system will keep the experience feeling new the entire time. So knowing all that, the question still remained, how can we create an ultimately variable yet completely procedural music system? This list represents some of the basics of this system. I wanted one that didn't overreact. It let gameplay develop before adding or changing music. I also believe that long gaps of silence benefited the game rather than hurt it. I feel that that approach is unique in a lot of titles, but with those long gameplay sessions, inundating the player with music just leads to fatigue. I also approach middleware as a tool and not as a crutch. It gives me the freedom to modify data on a frequent basis, but I didn't want it ruling the music system completely. Creating variations of music tracks gives me a huge advantage in creating large pools of music to pick from. Finally, using swaths of data that is already being tracked by the game really lives at the heart of the system. Let's look into each of these topics with more detail. So I call this a patient system. I found that if a music system responds too quickly to the player's actions, there's a high chance that you'll have a disconnect between the action on the screen and what the music is trying to play. And it's really tough to gauge what a player is going to do and for how long he or she is going to do it. If a music track is set to expire or change in our game, we'll add a short pause to see if the variables are still valid before taking action or doing anything to switch a music track. And I'll cover what all this means as we get into the types. Another thing we would do is we would pause the music system after a new track is played and after it is played and completes. This really prevents sporadic changes in music. Giving the player breathing room is also really important. And then long gaps of silence in the music system suggest that silence is golden. We spent a lot of time and energy working on the environments for the game, all in quadraphonic sound, and went to different parts of Washington to record 5 times a day and night. And each map in our game can have up to 7 or 8 different core loops that you'll hear as you roam through. So putting a lot of effort into the ambient sounds gave us that break. With that in mind, music doesn't need to be wall-to-wall. I felt that with those gaps, once the music kicked on, it has a much stronger emotional impact. We also relied on other systems when there's a gap. I mentioned the ambiances, but there's also a ton of effort placed in our Foley systems and a lot of distant sounds that you can hear to help build a kind of distant, unseen narrative. Keeping in mind that we're trying to spread this music out for a long period, slowing that pace down and adding in those bits of silence will really help. So State of Decay 1's music system originated because CryEngine's built-in system couldn't work with our open-world game design. It was a level-based system. And this original system that we created lived almost exclusively in XML, tracking data points from the game, and then that would decide how to play back specific music tracks. Fmod was really only used for volume control, crossfades, and streaming. It was really easy to live in XML with Fmod because the events and the audio assets were one-to-one. In State of Decay 2, I looked into using Wise's dynamic music system, but I had to ditch that as well. For our system, it made a lot more sense that we just kind of treated it like normal audio within Wise's switch networks. So I worked really closely with our main composer, Jesper Kyd. If you haven't heard of him, he's done big titles like Borderlands, Assassin's Creed, Hitman series. His list goes on and on. He's amazing. Thankfully, he agreed to deliver stems. So everything was broken out when I received it. You'd have a single guitar track on the track, drums split out, cello, everything that we could possibly use was on an individual layer. So with his permission, of course, I was able to create 1 to 3 variations of every single music track he delivered. So if he delivered Exploration 01, I would make an 01A, B, C, even a D. I try to maintain the original melodic feel while accentuating different aspects of the track to provide a different emotional tone even within that piece of music. And so I have a music background myself, and I was able to fill in the gaps that we weren't able to afford. So for the first game, I wrote about 80 minutes for State of Decay 1, and so far I've written 45 minutes for State of Decay 2, and about to do more in a couple weeks. And you would think that with 120 minutes, we'd have plenty of music, but it's just not the case with a game this varied. We hit a wall, and so basically as long as there's room on disk, I'm going to keep writing music. What that really allows us to do is to create multiple tracks for cues that would traditionally only have 1 or 2 variations for that track. We can have 4, 5, 6, whatever we really need. Live tracking game data is what makes this system possible. Of course, most music systems rely on player input of some sort, so that approach isn't unique. Figuring out what to track and how to decipher the data to represent meaningful player choice and therefore decide music selections took some time. So let's look at some of those factors by examining the 5 most common track types in State of Decay. We have exploration, home, or what we call bass music, suspense, or what you would think of as sneaking around, stealth, combat tracks, and music stingers. Before getting into each track type's rules and use in the game, let's look at what happens behind the curtain with the music system. So there are a few basic rules in order to decide how music flows into the game. A lot of this is based on what we call priorities. Equal priorities can't interrupt themselves. So if a priority 1 track, which is the lowest priority we have, is playing and the system wants to play another, we just let it just dies. It doesn't go anywhere. However, if a higher priority track becomes valid, something like, let's say, combat or an important music stinger, the lower priority track will immediately fade out, making room for the new one. I know that sounds really simple, but under the hood, there's a lot going on to decide what that mood is going to feel like. And even while music is playing, the system is constantly listening every single frame on what it's taking from the game to make these decisions. So some of the data points we look at include, of course, zombies. But we look at it in a lot of different ways. How many are close to the player? How many are far away? If the zombie is close, do they see the player? Are they actively targeting him or her to engage in combat? Zombies are, of course, the most crucial data point, and we track it in several different ways. We also look at player location. Are they near their base? We even look at within the base, how are the other members of your community are feeling? We take a condition called morale, where if you've been ignoring all your teammates and they're literally hungry or starving or dying of dehydration, their morale is going to dip, and that's going to affect music. We also hack into just normal things like time of day, because we have a 24-hour clock in our game, and that plays an important role so that some of the tracks were feeling too upbeat for daytime, so I would only have them at night, and vice versa. There's also different gameplay objects or scenarios that can really affect the music system, and we'll talk more about those soon. So switch networks. If you guys have used WISE, you know it's all about switches. So all of this data that we're getting from the game was either passed as in what's called a real-time RTPC parameter, so it's just a data point that floats around as things are happening, or a single on-off switch. So if it's an RTPC, I'll create a switch from that. You can take any of that floating point data, set it up into the switch network, and then decide what points you want to pass that condition. So in the game, you can have, let's say if we were counting just distant zombies, and those aren't necessarily ones that are even spawned, but we kind of know the condition possible for zombies based on where you are in the game. If you're in a busy town, we know that the threat level can be higher than if you're out in a field of a farm. And we'll split that out into safe, calm, dangerous, and infested. By floating that point around, we're constantly switching between those switch networks and making the next condition possible. So approaching it this way allows me to tune those switches even as design changes the game. Design will always change the game. And they won't always tell you either. But as you're playing, if you find that something's changed, or even if art changes how time of day works, we're able to follow that and line up our music selections. Other data points just have a yes-no condition. Am I near my base? Am I in a vehicle? Did I make a loud noise? Each condition might determine a track to play, a condition to set, or a stinger to queue up. So we're going to get into the actual tracks, and I have some visuals in a second, but I want to first talk about the most common track, exploration. So this was the bulk of the music budget. This is where the game's musical themes originate, so all your melodies and your things you will remember, or hopefully remember, come from exploration. However, that's still at the lowest priority, which means it'll only play if nothing else is actively playing. Exploration looks specifically at the distant zombie count, like I was mentioning, to determine how intense that music is going to play. When we worked with Jesper, we decided to go from actually pretty happy travel music, I mean, as happy as a zombie apocalypse can be, and then get really dark and intense. And as we're transitioning those, we focus on different parts of the music. If things are going well, we tend to simulate that with guitars, dobros, things of a kind of lighter nature. As it gets more intense, we bring in more synth aspects, a lot of analog modular gear, and it gets a lot darker feeling. So, as I was kind of saying, the ambient threat level is not only decided by actual zombies, but also by the geographical location. One of my sound designers literally goes to the map and puts a weight over each area that can affect the system. By doing that, we can have different parts of the map that feel different with music. There's also switches for time of day, and even whether you're playing by yourself or with friends. If I hadn't mentioned State of Decay 2, State of Decay 1 was solo only, but State of Decay 2 is going to be 4-player co-op. And I really took that to heart, and there are some exclusive tracks that are just one way or the other. So depending on who you're playing with or not, you're going to get different music. So with these different switch networks, I try to steer the tone and intensity to match what's going on. So a lot of these buckets share tracks or variations of the tracks. You can't have it be entirely exclusive. Otherwise, you might get a situation where the player isn't hearing some of the tracks ever. I noticed, especially with State of Decay 1 while I was building this, that people don't play like me and no two people play like each other. So watching a lot of different UR studies showed me different play styles, and I tried to make sure that all those were represented. So from bucket to bucket, safe to calm, calm to dangerous, dangerous to infested, they'll have some similarities, but a lot of differences. And those differences will be either in exclusive track types that are the dark stuff when it's really intense and the lighter stuff when it's less, but also those variations come into play here, where you can have exploration 4A in one and 4B in another, and they'll feel different, but the player will still kind of remember those tones. Exploration is also where a lot of the music pacing happens, because this is the only spot where I introduce those long delays. So at the end of each track, we set a delay range. And in that delay range, we still, again, look at the distant zombie count. If there are more distant zombies, we delay it for less. If you're in a calmer spot, we delay it for more. And these delays can go anywhere from, I think right now I've got it set up to between 1 and 4 or 5 minutes of silence. However, there's a lot of things that can happen in those minutes. Before we get on to some of those things, I actually want to show real quick a a visual example of how this might work. So let's say the system says exploration is going to play. We then look at, this is one I just made this up last week, early game, late game. I was figuring out with all these different variations down here, some even from the original game I pulled over, we wanted to ensure that in the beginning part of the game, basically the first couple of hours, that you heard the new tracks and the A versions, the original versions of those tracks, and not the variations. So we'll actually start by deciding, are you just started or are you in the bulk of the gameplay? After that's figured out, and that's one of those yes-no conditions. If you finished what we call the first series of missions, we'll say, okay, that flag is set and it's set forever. So it's a lot of work actually just to get this working for a couple hours, but I think it's a really important couple of hours. We then come down and see what time of day is it? And each of these will spill out into their own sets. In this case, it's going to be nighttime. Am I playing by myself or am I playing with friends? And again, once that decision is made, it'll come down again. And then those distant zombie counts will tell you, based on an RTPC set in here, which bucket to play from. So in this case, it's playing the safest condition. You're probably either have killed off all the zombies in the area, or you're near your base or an area that you cleared out. And then from there, it's just a random container, and of course, I'll weight all of these. The original tracks from the original game will be weighted really lightly. And all that's set in wise. The actual data sets for this, as I mentioned, were in UE4. And this is the music system. I mean, really, I think every track is enabled. I don't really know why we have that checkbox. Skip delay I'll cover in a moment. But we look at how important the track is. Are we looking at something manual? Are we looking for enemies? We can even decide what kind of enemy it's going to be. Is it going to be a zombie or other? These are all those delays I was mentioning. So when the track starts, I want the system to be patient. I want you to just hang out and play the music. Even if something really important happens right away, it's going to wait until after that delay so that you don't get one track playing and another one interrupting right after that. So even after a track is told to stop, so let's take the condition that you're in your base, and the player walks out of the base and goes, oh, well, you're away from your base. Let's stop the base music, but then they turn around, right? That's open world. So I say, wait. In this case, let's wait. Well, this one doesn't have one, but let's assume it was 9 seconds. So it's going to wait 9 seconds and then decide, okay, did they really leave or did they turn around? And if they really left, it'll do a nice fade out. And then we come to the end track delay. This is another one where the music system says, whoa, don't do anything yet. Let's give it a breather. Let's wait, in this case, 21 seconds before anything else can happen. And then here are those delays that I was talking about. So in this gap, it will be silent. Down here, we've got situations that will be used for things like combat. How many near enemies are needed? And that's not necessarily the same situation for stopping that track. You might need 9 zombies to, let's say, trigger combat. But it doesn't mean that once you kill one, the system's going to turn off. We're going to wait until you kill 6 or 7 of them, and you're in the clear. We also look at near non-aggravated zombies, which we'll get into in a moment, to do sneaking music. And there's a threshold for that as well. This one's fairly new, cooldown seconds. The danger, of course, is if we play a looping track, there's a chance it never stops. There could be situations where, especially if we are playing it from a force queue in a mission, the looping track will just keep going and going and going. So we can set something here to say, like, if it's been 60 seconds of playing straight, let's just move on. So the next one I want to talk about is home track. So equal priorities can't interrupt each other, but this one can interrupt silence, and a lot of them can. What that means is if you're in that long break of nothing playing and you happen to walk towards your base, you're literally looking at it, and at that threshold, we set a distance, and then you start hearing the music. Knowing the team's morale will tell you whether things are going good or not, even before you get there to see if they're like crouched over and hurting or starving. The music will cue you to what your base is going through even before you get there. So in that morale, we have high, normal, low. So yeah, if you're in that gap and then you approach, it'll interrupt. And that really does help line up what you're seeing with what you get. Suspense can also be considered tension or sneaking music. Also, like home, it's priority 1 track. It can also interrupt silence, which means that if the condition is met and nothing is playing, it'll start right away. So in this case, this one's unique. We look at zombies that are close to the player but don't see him or her. And this is just a data point. This was really trying to figure out how to play something that's tense but not combat. And this one is the hardest to tune. What I assume is that if the zombies aren't seeing the person, you're probably hiding. You're hiding behind something or around something or in a building as they go past. And so what I'm assuming from that is that there's a condition where that could change one way or the other. They're going to see you, you're going to make noise, they're going to come after you. But for that time, it's playing the suspense looping track. It's hard to tune because if you think about it, there's both a range and a threshold that's required. The range is how far of a circle are we going to look to count this group of zombies, and that's in meters. Right now, I think it's about 17 meters away. We're calculating every zombie that doesn't see you. Then how many zombies are needed? And just one change can have a huge impact. If you're looking at 17 meters, the difference between 6 zombies and 7 zombies not seeing you really goes a long way. I'm actually still working on tuning this just right. So combat. As I was saying, a lot of times, stealth music will be interrupted by combat, usually when the player gets seen or makes too much noise. So the threshold to start combat music is pretty constant. But again, that distant zombie count decides what type or intensity of combat you're going to hear. If you're in a safe area, we don't want a big type of combat music. We might even play something lighter that still has some guitar where you're most likely not going to be in that much trouble, and the player is more of a hero in that state than, fish food. I guess zombie food in that case. So constantly tracking that zombie count lets us also control the volume of the combat music. We'll, as more zombies approach, if you make more noise and more zombies come, we'll turn the music up and the zombies down. So there's kind of a dynamic mixing happening based on live parameters. To stop the music, the player must either kill off enough zombies or run away from them. And like I said earlier, and once that threshold is met, the music system still doesn't do anything. It waits those few seconds and then double checks again to see that the condition is still stable. So that means that we want to wait and see if more come or if they catch you, because if they catch you, and then we don't want to just stop combat music and restart and stop and restart. It comes all back to being that patient system. I'm sure you noticed we skipped priority 2, and this is reserved mainly for stingers or cues. Right now we have 2 main types. There's roaming hordes, so zombies can get together in hordes, and they actually can have a little mini-map icon. And if they see you, all of them see you at once and charge. So that's a pretty big moment, and we'll play a specific cue. Even then, we set a delay before it does anything else. So it's going to let this kind of dangerous cue go. And let's say you get away, get in a car. We don't immediately want to trigger combat. We want to see what the player did. More often than more often than not, the zombies come crashing and start eating your face. We also have a big part of the game is also searching for supplies. So you search in houses, burnt out cars, all sorts of things. And in our game, you can choose to search slow or quick. Searching quickly has a chance to crash everything down. Imagine you're just trying to move all this stuff out of the way, and you make a loud noise. We have a special crash stinger that plays, and again, we'll wait 15 or 20 seconds before deciding what to do with the next cue. And again, at that point, we'll see what the conditions are and decide whether to play exploration or combat. So there are a lot of ways the game data gets modified before reaching the music system. So approaching this, I understood that not all situations are created equal. So we give different weights to different situations so that I can better match the mood. There are different types of freaks in our game, including ones called screamers that scream really loud and call other zombies for help, and huge giants called juggernauts. These zombies can weight the system to change the overall intensity in a big way. I can apply a value of each freak and give it its own weight. What this means is if a zombie is worth 1, I can say a juggernaut is worth 4. And if you only needed 7 regular zombies to trigger combat, in this case, you'd only need 3 regular and 1 juggernaut. It really is trying to define the moment of danger. How dangerous is this situation going to be? Zombies also take up what's called an infestation. Well, they'll take over a house or a building on the map. These can get really out of hand in our game. Out of hand for the player, that is, because they make everything more and more dangerous for the world. More ambient zombies will spawn, and they'll all be attracted to that area. So we not only count each zombie inside the building, but the infestation itself also gives a weight, making the world and the music system more dangerous. There's also things that make the music system less responsive. For example, getting in a car will divide the active zombie count. I noticed that if you have enough zombies to get into combat, and you get in a car, it's basically like armor. You can just start plowing them over. And so it felt weird that combat kept chugging along. So in this case, we divide it by 3. Whatever the count is, you're in a car, divide by 3. So if you're swarmed, you still get combat. If you're not, then it just lets the music system calm down. So there's a lot more that goes into the system, but those are some of the main pillars to choose the right music. So by having the game constantly listening to player feedback and gameplay, we're able to accommodate different play styles. By keeping the structure simple and straightforward, the player can be free to be reckless in the open world without breaking the music system. We really needed something that was bulletproof, and that was the goal. Tons of variations, remixed assets keep the music new for a very long time. Supporting an extended play length timeline to cover those situations where you have just a few hours, and I even saw someone who had played the original game 800 hours. So that with a solid musical palette and direction, I do believe that the music for State of Decay can really shine and enhance the player's experience as they live out the zombie apocalypse. More importantly, I do feel that this system, being as simple as it is, can be applied to a lot of different game types. Sitting outside of WISE or proprietary data, I think a programmer took 4 days to kind of hook this up. It was really simple. Once he gave me all those hooks and knobs, I mean, the audio team's allowed to do what we want to do to really match the mood. And if you haven't played it, I really think you should once it comes out next year. And that's it from me for now.
Thank you, Kevin. And now we're ready to proceed to Q&A session. If you have any question, please raise your hand and make sure you speak in the microphone.
Hi, sorry I was late. I hope you didn't cover this at the first part.
That's okay.
So because music is, can be an expensive process and it's iterative, at what point did you come up to the levels that you were going to divide things to, and were you just continually composing music with Jesper as you went, or did you do it on the fly, or did you do some yourself ahead of time until almost like placeholder?
Right. No placeholder. Our team is too small. So the first game, I was the only audio person, period, for A to Z. And now we have me and just 2 others. So we had to decide a lot of things very early on. And so to mitigate risk, we started with exploration, the least subject to change, and we've just been getting riskier and riskier as we go. We're still ahead of production. So we're still writing music for things that don't exist yet. But having that direction and knowing that we're going to have these different types of zones lets us decide what type of assets are going to go where. We took a lot of UX data or UR data to decide, see what kind of situations players are going to be in. And then we attributed portions of that budget or percentages to those different track types. Even now we actually have telemetry working in State of K2, and I'm hoping to get a hook to the distant zombie count to make sure that that range of music is being tracked. Because again, I play my way, you guys play your way, so watching that data from other players is going to be really valuable as we're tuning it down the home stretch.
Thank you.
Hi, sorry being late as well. I have a simple question. I love your approach.
Thanks.
I have actually myself way back ago, year 2000, I developed a bit similar system to the first interactive television series in Finland. It has 5 audio tracks. One of them was Foley track and then 4 music tracks, and then also the system did live video editing, and that's also listened. But anyway, I don't want to talk about my system. I want to buy your system. Is it? Do you license it, or is it your personal competitive advantage?
What was the actual question?
Do you license your system?
Do I license? No, it's all original. Yeah, so it's either me or Jesper Kidd, our composer, and he's doing a lot of the main melodic pieces. What I'm working on myself when I compose is a lot of the more textural drones.
So sorry, I think you didn't understand. I mean, can another gaming company buy your system?
No.
No.
You can copy it. I saw people taking pictures.
Yeah.
I mean, I made it up, right? Like that's a good question. You can't buy it, but
Yeah,
I didn't say you couldn't.
It's your competitive advantage, of course. Yeah. Okay.
I thought you meant license the music, not license the system. I know you can't have the music.
Hello, my name
Hi.
is Alex.
Hi.
Thank you for your election. And we also had works with Jesper.
Nice.
He's a great composer. And I want to ask you, how many takes or variations do you have in your random containers for each switch to be interactive
Right.
still?
Yeah, no, that's tough. I just did an audit of everything. There's a couple things that are important. You know, I mentioned that a lot of those buckets are shared, or that there's situations where we want to kind of duplicate that out so that we're not ditching any specific track. So I took a look at which ones are being underutilized and which ones are being used kind of the same amount. But for each of those situations, I think it really depends on the track type. For exploration, it's anywhere between 15 to 20 per bucket. Those variations decrease when you're at night, but our nighttime is not proportionate to our daytime. So nighttime, the entire day-night cycle lasts 2 hours, and I think nighttime's only 20 minutes. So I really take into account how long or how often are you going to hear that music. We have more exploration than anything, so there's more variations of that. But even combat, if we're designing for those systems, I still think it's 7 or 8 per bucket to make sure that, you know, we've got a lot of variation.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. Do you have any examples right now to show us? Just like
I don't, because we're still in production, I'm not allowed to play
Okay.
anything.
Thank you.
More question, please?
Actually, however, if you see me after, I can show you a link to some of the original music.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you. I have question. For example, some hypothetical. Можно и на русском? Да, хорошо. То есть у нас есть гипотетическая игра, в которой
We have hypothetically a game, and the player can go to, say, a forest to cut a wood there and bring it to the village. And we have ambient sound for the forest, and we have corresponding sound ambient sound for the village.
So we have ambient sound for forest and we have ambient sound for village and they switch. How to fix that?
They don't switch?
Uh,
They fix by some delay, you know, ambient sound of forest, там, как вот, дятел, там, всякие звуки леса, forest sounds.
A woodpecker, the sound of the forest.
So why don't, since it's not directly music, let's talk afterwards maybe. And we can
okay.
talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? So I guess that's it.
All right, thank you very much,
Thank
everyone.
you so much, Carl. Thank you.
So we keep catching our speakers in the hallway and putting cameras in front of them. Hi, please introduce yourself.
My name is Samuel Ranteskla. I work for Microsoft as a principal program manager out of Sweden.
Okay, Samuel, so let's talk about games. What's your favorite game?
Well, I wish I played a lot more games than I actually do. So I have to go back into the past. Like one of my really favorite games is Jag the Lions 2 from like 92, 93. I think it was made here in Russia, if I'm not mistaken. Civilization, always been a big fan of that. And then the Enemy Unknown UFO trilogy from the 90s. There's so many games, I mean, it's like impossible to select one. But they're all strategic games, the ones that are my favorite.
Yeah, you're obviously a tactician. That's commendable. But do you remember the very first game you've ever played?
Decathlon, probably on the X86, somewhere around 84.
Wow, that's... I don't even remember that one.
It's like you basically play Decathlon and you just hammer at the keyboard to go faster, like 10 different sports events. Played it like crazy. I was 8 years old then.
Wow. How did you get into the gaming industry?
It was by chance, actually. So I was studying at Uppsala University, doing computer science, and they had this fair where companies were meeting the students. And there was these two guys that they've started a game company in the basement, and they wanted somebody to write a BSP tree, binary space partitioning tree. And I was looking for my thesis, so I figured let's combine those. So I joined them, I wrote my thesis in the games industry, and then from there on kind of like just went on. So this was 2000.
But now in 2017, what's your favorite and least favorite thing about game dev?
I mean, I think the games industry is awesome. great place to work. There's so much passion. There's skilled, very intelligent people. I think that's my favorite thing. The least favorite thing is that, which I covered in my speech a little bit, I think that we're looking a little bit too much at how do we turn time into money, rather than seeing like how do we educate our kids. I really want to, that's my passion myself, is like take this experience, make our kids better tomorrow than they are today. I'm a parent as well, so that's coming from that.
Well, that's a very noble thing to do.
I don't know if noble, just I think it would be a good thing for us.
Definitely is. About your speech, did you have any interesting questions that maybe stood out?
Yeah, there was some interesting questions, like if we look at mixed reality, what's going to happen with that? What's the dangers with that? I couldn't really answer them because let's see what happens.
But if you were a part of your own audience, what question would you like to ask yourself?
That was a tricky one. Are you sure that you're right?
Are you?
No.
Well, we can be sure 100%, but still, we're trying to foresee the future here. How do you like the conference?
Love it. St. Petersburg, great place. Wargaming, excellent hosts. It's a great place to be. You should come to the next one.
Definitely do. Say, if you had the chance to go back in time to when you just started working in the industry and give yourself one advice, what would it be?
Try one of your ideas out.
That's very good. Thank you very much, Samuel. I hope you like the conference. Thank you. We got another one of our speakers here at 4C and would like to ask him some questions. Hi, please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Eric and I'm the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio based in Helsinki, Finland.
Very nice to meet you, Eric. Tell me, what's the very first video game you've ever played?
I guess when I was a little kid, my dad was in banking and he had a lot of business trips and he went to Japan. And he brought me one of these Nintendo handheld, like small games. It probably was Donkey Kong. So that's my first memories with gaming. And then I played a lot of Oil Panic with the Disney characters. So fond memories with those. Favorite gaming memories? Well, I like games that I can play with my friends. I remember when I was in high school, we'd go visit my friend's house and we played a lot of these like sports games together, like NHL 95 and some F1 racing games. So I would say that maybe NHL 95 is the game that I have played most with my friends, and I have fond memories of, you know, starting after school and then realizing this like 2 a.m. and knowing that my mother will be very angry when I come home late.
That happened to all of us, I think. How did you start in the video game industry? What led you here?
I was earlier a marketing lecturer at this business school in Helsinki. And then at some point I realized that instead of talking about business, that I'd like to do business myself. I had my own startup for 3 years, did different kinds of entertainment apps. I was interested in storytelling in apps and online and social media. After that, I did that for 3 years, failed miserably. But I guess the one thing I learned was how to test concepts early with real customer data. Because when you have little money, you need to be sure that you're spending it wisely. And I had the opportunity to join an existing team. So I joined Do Dreams as a CEO. And together with the wonderful team I have there, we started with these mini games, eventually came up with Drive Ahead, which is our current franchise that we're developing.
Sounds great. Tell me what.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a bit in the camera.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So what's your favorite thing about the video gaming industry, or maybe just something you strongly like about it?
I think my favorite thing about the gaming industry is the community of developers. So traveling around the world, meeting wonderful people who make games, and talking to people and learning from them. I think it's really cool how in gaming people are very open to share their experiences about the business aspect of running a game studio, management stuff, tips and advice on scaling and growing a company. It has been very useful for me, and hopefully by giving talks at events like this, maybe I can give something back to the community.
Oh, you definitely are. Anything that maybe irritates you or something you don't like about the industry, strongly dislike?
Well, I think in recent years, games are developed with data and analytics, and that's of course very important. And I think all the creative decisions should be based on data. But what I've noticed is that studios maybe give up quite easily on games and their communities. So we have found that if we really invest in the community and take care of the players by making regular updates to the game, thinking of the game not as a product but as a service, then the community will support you through difficult times.
What trends do you think are going to persist or maybe appear anew in like a 10 years time? Let's make a prediction.
Oh, that's a very tricky question. So with everything developing so fast, I guess it's really difficult to say. I'm very excited about AR. So our studio, we launched our first augmented reality game, Drive Ahead Mini Golf, just yesterday. So I'm very interested in seeing how this market will develop in the next year or two. If you look at 10-year perspective, then maybe games will be everywhere. Maybe like your glasses could be a platform for playing games.
I'd love that.
Yeah. So maybe it will be very interesting to see what kind of sessioning games will have when people could basically be playing all the time.
What do you think is more important in a game, like one of its aspects, the ever discussed questions, the graphics, the gameplay, the game design, the storytelling maybe?
We usually start with a fun core gameplay. So of course we want to make fun, cool games, but we found that that's not enough. So you need to make sure that your players have a reason to return to the game often, and they want to return with their friends. So I think planning this progression and making sure that there are some kind of events like live operations, I think that's very important. And though everybody knows monetization is important, like just thinking of the path the player takes in the game and when are they presented with opportunities to spend money or watch videos or do something like that, like connecting the revenue model with making the game experience better. I think that's very crucial.
Do you have a vision of a video game you'd like to create if you weren't restricted in absolutely no way, like financially, creatively?
There's only one right answer to this, and that is that if we would have no financial restrictions, we would be doing the exact same thing that we're doing now. So I believe that the format that we have, developing games with minimum risk and investment, testing concepts early with players, and launching games thanks to this wonderful, large and active community that we have with Drive Ahead, is the way that we would want to do it, regardless of what kind of budget we have.
Sounds fair. Let's come back to the real world for a moment. What do you think about St. Petersburg?
St. Petersburg is a wonderful place. We've been blessed by wonderful weather this time. I heard from the locals that we're very lucky to enjoy this nice weather. I've had the opportunity to visit St. Petersburg 3 times during the last year for a couple of events, and I'm always excited to meet the local developers. Our drive-ahead game on Android, Russia is the largest market for us, and this is something that we want to understand better, like why people like the game here, and see how we as a studio could be more present in Russia and be closer to our fans, the players, on Russian social media. So that's why I'm always interested to visit Russia and meet people if I have the chance.
Well, now you have the chance, another one, at this event 4C, and what do you think about it?
I've had a chance to talk at many international events in China and the US, GDC, and places in Europe. I think 4C is the best organized event I've ever been to. You guys are taking really good care of the guests, and the lineup is awesome. So I'm giving a talk myself, but the rest of the time I have a full schedule of listening to presentations. So usually when I go to these international conferences, I'm quite tied up with meeting partners, but here I'm really going to enjoy going to the talks myself and hearing what the experiences people share.
And if you were interviewing yourself right now, what question would you like to ask yourself?
What question would I like to ask myself? I'd probably ask that, why do I have this wonderful beard?
Why do you?
Well, I'll tell you guys a secret. So I'm actually the great-grandson of Santa Claus. And that's why I have this beard, and Santa Claus said to me that you have to learn how to bring people of the world joy. So that's why for the next about 200 years I'm going to be the CEO of the Do Dreams game studio. And one day, in about 200 years, when my beard is all white, then I will become the next Santa Claus.
Really looking forward to it, and from the presents from you. What are you looking forward to? What's maybe the speech that you'd like to hear most? Anything specific?
I love all these demos and case studies that people do. I really like the talks where people go through some project and go through their experiences. So I have several of those in my schedule.
Great, sounds exciting. And now children all over the world are excited for a new Santa. And I hope you have a good time here. Thank you.
Thank you.